In this video, we're going to try to create a clipped terrain model from a much larger terrain model. The larger terrain model is made up of point cloud information that I downloaded from the following web page. I went to the Missouri Spatial Data Information Services, I went to Data, and then went to LiDAR Data. To show you that this is LiDAR data, I'm going to go ahead and click on the terrain model. I'm going to go to Properties. I'm going to go override the symbology of the reference file, and I will turn on the triangles. Now when doing this, if it's a large LiDAR file, you might have to take a little time, or a large terrain model, it might take a little time to load. But you can see how tight the triangles are, and that's typical with LiDAR data. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the terrain model triangles. I'll switch the override symbology back to no. To show you what's in this file, I'm going to go to my references. Again, there's the terrain model. If I turn it off, you can see that the terrain model turns off. Here's my web map server, which is basically the image that you see on the screen. And also in that file is this red shape, which is my clipping area that I'm going to use for my terrain model that I want to create. Now to clip this terrain model into a smaller terrain model, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Task, I'm going to go down to Terrain Model, and I'm going to select this icon right here, Create Clip Terrain Model. And when you click on that tool, it brings up the following dialog box. You can set the feature definition beforehand with the name, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the heads-up display and then worry about the feature definition a little bit later. So it says locate the reference terrain model. I'm going to click on the only one that I have in the file. It says now locate the clipping element, which is going to be my red shape that I have there. I will reset when I'm done selecting the clipping, which is just a right click. Now it's going to ask for a horizontal and vertical offset. I'm going to say 0 to both. And then it's going to give me the clipping method of either external or internal. I want to clip off the external triangles, so I'm going to leave it on external and just left click. When I do that, the terrain model gets created. You can see that it's been created with no feature definition. Once you have the new terrain model, you have to understand that that terrain model was created with rules that link it to the clipping shape that you used and also the larger terrain file. If we would remove the clipping shape or the terrain file, this terrain model would either disappear or get as large as the existing terrain model. For example, if I would go to the reference dialog and remove this boundary that was in the web map server reference file, this terrain model would get as large as the original TIN file. To show you that, I can go to References, I can go to my web map server, and I can delete or detach the web map server. I'm going to hit OK to that. It's going to give me a delete reference dialog box that says the reference has probable dependencies in the current civil model. Detaching the reference will break the relationship or the rules, which may be permanent. Are you sure you want to detach it? Again, we're going to do it just to show you that that terrain model was dependent upon that clipping shape. When we delete it, that clipping shape goes away, and then the terrain model will get as big as the larger terrain model. So you can see that that rule was there with that clipping shape. To undo this, I'm just going to hit the MicroStation undo. And to fix this issue, what you can do is you can deactivate the rules of this terrain model. All you have to do is click on the terrain model itself, slide over to the ruler, click down, and then go down to Remove Rule. When you remove the rule, that boundary that you used to clip, or that shape that you used to clip, no longer is a factor, or no longer is the terrain model dependent upon that shape for its size. Same thing for the terrain model. You can remove the terrain model, you can remove the shape. this terrain model, this new terrain model, this clip terrain model should remain the same. Now there is a bug still out there, depending on what version you're running on, that will not allow you to remove the terrain model itself. Typically, if that happens, what we would do is we would copy this terrain model to a different file using the MicroStation clipboard. But what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to remove both terrain model or both reference files just to see if we can do it, since the rules have been removed from the clipped terrain model. So I'm going to select both reference files and I'm going to do a Tools Detach. We're going to say OK to that. Now detaching those two reference files might take a little time depending upon how large your original or your reference files were. And the one file that had our LiDAR terrain model in it was fairly large. So, but you can see we were able to detach both reference files. Now if you weren't able to delete both reference files, and what I'll do is I'll just do an undo, what we'll do is we'll copy that terrain model out of this file. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this file, and then I'm going to snap to the corner of the shape and then do a copy. So I'm going to select the file, I'm going to snap to the corner of it, and I'm going to do an Edit, Copy. Then I'm going to go into a new file that I have already set up that has the web map server and the clipping shape in it already. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an Edit, Paste. And when I do an Edit, Paste, you can see that the clip terrain model is on your cursor, and I'm going to snap to the corner of that shape, just using that shape as a reference to where that terrain model needs to go. Once the terrain model is in this drawing, I can go ahead and detach or undisplay, if you want, the web map server, and there is your clipped terrain model. Now remember, when we clipped the terrain model, we didn't apply the correct feature definition. And right now, if I would go to the properties of this terrain model, you'll see that I've got a whole bunch of stuff that typically you don't see with a terrain model. And the reason that is because we don't have a feature definition applied to this terrain model. So to do that, what I'm going to do to fix that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my task, I'm going to go to General Geometry, and I'm going to slide down to where it says Set Feature Definition. Now when you bring up the Set Feature Definition, you've got two feature types. You've got linear and surface, and we're dealing with the surface with this clipped terrain model, so we're going to set it to surface. And the feature definition that I want to pick is going to be, and I just personally like the existing boundary. You can set it to whichever feature definition you want to choose, but I'm going to use existing boundary. And then if you want to, you can also give it a name. Once you have the set feature definition, all you need to do is go out and locate the element. I'm going to click on it, and then you have to reset the complete. Again, since I select existing boundary, that's all we're going to see is the boundary of our terrain model. But if you want to, you can go into properties, and this time when I go into properties, the property list should be much smaller than it was before, and I can always go in and I can turn on the triangles. So that's all there is to clipping a larger terrain model into a smaller one. The biggest trick is remembering that you have to drop the rules after you create the clipped terrain model, because those rules are still interdependent upon the clipping shape and the previous larger terrain model.